You're being too sensitive. Why can't you be more like your sister? Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. If these phrases sound familiar from your childhood, you weren't just dealing with stressed parents having bad days. According to developmental psychologists, these specific statements represent something more systematic. Verbal patterns that reveal parents who weren't emotionally equipped for the complexity of raising children. Research suggests these patterns can influence emotional development well into adulthood, shaping how you process emotions, relationships, and self-worth for decades to come. Hey there, neurospicy folks! I'm Dr. Monty, and I'm an ADHD psychologist with a special interest in all things neurodivergent neuroscience. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel to help me grow and bring more scientific understanding and awareness to a larger audience. Thanks so much! Most discussions of harmful parenting focus on obviously abusive language, screaming, name-calling, threats of violence. But the phrases we're examining today are far more insidious because they sound almost reasonable. They're the kind of things well-meaning parents say when they're overwhelmed, tired, or simply repeating what they heard growing up. This is why the psychological impact is so profound and so overlooked. A parent who says, "You're being too sensitive," isn't necessarily cruel. They might genuinely believe they're teaching resilience. A parent who asks, "Why can't you be more like your sibling?" might think they're providing motivation. These phrases masquerade as parenting techniques. Developmental psychology has revealed over the past 3 decades that the impact of these statements has nothing to do with the parent's intent and everything to do with how a developing brain processes repeated emotional invalidation. Dr. Diana Baumrind's longitudinal research on parenting styles found that children exposed to consistent emotional dismissal showed different patterns of emotional regulation compared to those whose feelings were regularly acknowledged. The children don't have the cognitive capacity to separate a parent's momentary frustration from a fundamental judgment about their worth. When these phrases become patterns, they can become part of the child's internal dialogue. The research suggests that children who hear these phrases regularly may develop what psychologists call emotional dysregulation. Their nervous systems can become hypervigilant to criticism and rejection, while simultaneously losing confidence in their own emotional responses. This isn't about helicopter parenting versus tough love. This is about fundamental misunderstandings of how children's brains actually develop emotional intelligence. Think of a child's emotional system like a musical instrument being tuned. Each interaction with a parent either helps calibrate that instrument or throws it further out of tune. The specific phrases that cause the most concern work by targeting different aspects of emotional development. "You're being too sensitive" may do something particularly problematic. It teaches the child that their emotional radar system is fundamentally unreliable. When children hear this repeatedly, they can develop difficulty trusting their own feelings as valid information about their environment. When a child feels hurt and expresses that hurt, they're essentially saying, "My emotional system is detecting a problem." When a parent responds with, "You're too sensitive," they're not just dismissing the current emotion, they're potentially training the child to distrust their entire emotional detection system. While we don't have definitive neuroimaging data on this specific phenomenon, clinical observations suggest that adults who experienced chronic emotional invalidation as children may struggle with emotional awareness and regulation. "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about" creates what psychologists describe as an impossible situation. The child is experiencing genuine distress, but expressing that distress leads to the threat of more distress. Dr. John Gottman's longitudinal research following families has found correlations between harsh responses to emotional expression and heightened stress responses that can persist into adulthood. "Why can't you be more like your sibling?" triggers what researchers have observed as harmful comparison patterns. Dr. Lori Kramer's research on sibling relationships at Northeastern University found that children subjected to regular comparisons were more likely to develop what psychologists term conditional self-worth. Their sense of value becomes tied to outperforming others. The brain's reward system appears to shift. Instead of intrinsic motivation, everything becomes about external validation. "You made me do this," typically said during punishment, represents psychological blame shifting that teaches children they are responsible for adult emotions and behaviors. Clinical research suggests that children who hear this may develop what psychologists call hyper-responsibility. They become adults who feel accountable for everyone else's feelings while neglecting their own emotional needs. "That didn't happen," or "you're imagining things," constitutes gaslighting, and it's particularly concerning because it attacks the child's grip on reality itself. Dr. Robin Stern's research on gaslighting shows that children subjected to this can develop chronic self-doubt and what she calls reality testing deficits. They lose confidence in their own perceptions and memories. "I do everything for you and you're still not grateful," may create what psychologists call gratitude guilt. The child learns that having needs or wants makes them fundamentally selfish. Dr. Robert Emmons' research on gratitude at UC Davis shows that forced gratitude actually decreases genuine appreciation and increases resentment and shame. "You're just like your father or mother," said as an insult, attacks the child's core identity by suggesting that fundamental parts of who they are, their genetics, their inherited traits, are shameful. Children who hear this regularly may develop what Dr. Bessel van der Kolk calls identity fragmentation. They reject parts of themselves that are actually neutral or positive. "I love you, but I don't like you right now," might sound like emotional honesty, but to a developing brain, it can be devastating. Children often can't distinguish between temporary disapproval and fundamental rejection. Dr. Alan Shore's research on attachment suggests that this phrase may contribute to disorganized attachment. The child simultaneously craves and fears parental connection. The research on verbal emotional patterns has some significant limitations that we need to address honestly. There's the replication crisis. Many of the foundational studies on childhood emotional experiences were conducted with small sample sizes and haven't been successfully replicated across diverse populations. Dr. Jerome Kagan's critique of developmental psychology points out that much of what we assume about childhood's impact on adult personality may be overstated. Human beings are more resilient and changeable than early trauma research suggested. Cultural context matters enormously. What constitutes emotional invalidation varies dramatically across cultures. Dr. Xinyin Chen's cross-cultural research shows that phrases considered harmful in Western individualistic cultures might be normative and even beneficial in collectivist cultures that prioritize group harmony over individual emotional expression. There's also the issue of retrospective bias. Adults who struggle with self-esteem or relationship issues may be more likely to remember and interpret childhood interactions as harmful. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus's decades of memory research shows that our recollections of childhood are heavily influenced by our current psychological state. We're dealing with what researchers call the dosage problem. Hearing any of these phrases once or twice doesn't create lasting impact. The research focuses on children who heard them regularly, systematically, as part of a broader pattern of emotional invalidation. But determining what constitutes regular versus occasional is surprisingly difficult to measure objectively. There's also the question of neurodivergent children. Dr. Ari Neyman's research shows that autistic children, children with ADHD, or highly sensitive children may be more vulnerable to these phrases. but they may also be more likely to elicit them from frustrated parents who don't understand their neurological differences. Finally, there's what psychologists call the good enough parent paradox. Donald Winnicott's research suggests that perfect parenting isn't just impossible, it's actually harmful. Children need to experience some frustration and disappointment to develop resilience. The question becomes, where's the line between necessary frustration and psychological harm? Most importantly, we're largely dealing with correlational research here. While we can observe that certain childhood experiences are associated with certain adult outcomes, establishing direct causation is extremely difficult. Many factors influence how childhood experiences shape adult psychology, and individual resilience varies enormously. So, what does this research mean for how you understand your own childhood and current relationships? If you heard these phrases regularly growing up, understand that your emotional responses aren't broken. They may be adapted. Your brain likely developed survival strategies for an environment where emotional expression was risky or where your perceptions were consistently questioned. Those strategies may not serve you well in healthier relationships, but they made sense given what you were dealing with. The hypervigilance you might feel in relationships, constantly scanning for signs of criticism or rejection, isn't paranoia. It's a detection system that may have kept you safe in childhood. The challenge now is learning when it's safe to dial down that vigilance. If you find yourself automatically apologizing for having feelings, or asking others to validate your perceptions before you trust them, these aren't character flaws. They may be the logical result of having your emotional reality consistently questioned or dismissed. For those who are parents now, this research offers both warning and hope. The warning is clear. These phrases can cause measurable concern for developing minds. But the hope is equally important. Children are remarkably resilient when they have even one relationship where their emotions are consistently validated. Dr. Bruce Perry's research on trauma and resilience shows that what matters isn't perfect parenting, but relational repair. When you mess up, and you will, what may heal the damage is acknowledging the impact, taking responsibility, and demonstrating through your actions that the child's emotional experience matters to you. If you catch yourself using these phrases, the most powerful thing you can do is circle back. Earlier, when I said you were being too sensitive, I was wrong. Your feelings make sense, and I want to understand what you were trying to tell me. This kind of repair may actually strengthen the relationship and teach children that relationships can survive conflict and misunderstanding. The research also suggests that healing happens through what psychologists call corrective emotional experiences, relationships where your emotions are consistently validated and your perceptions are trusted. This might happen in therapy, in friendships, in romantic partnerships, or even in your relationship with your own children. The research ultimately reveals that those phrases aren't just mean things that stressed parents say. They may represent systematic challenges to a child's developing emotional intelligence, reality testing, and sense of self-worth. You're being too sensitive can teach children to distrust their emotions. Why can't you be more like your sibling? May create conditional self-worth. You made me do this potentially installs inappropriate responsibility for adult behavior. These phrases represent parents who, whatever their intentions, weren't equipped to handle the emotional complexity of raising another human being. The impact isn't permanent. Our brains remain capable of forming new neural pathways throughout our lives, but understanding how these phrases may have shaped your inner landscape is the first step toward rewriting the script. Your childhood emotional experiences weren't your fault, but healing them is your responsibility. And that healing is not only possible, It's happening every time you choose to validate rather than dismiss, to take responsibility rather than blame shift, to see your children's emotions as information rather than inconvenience.